All right, welcome out, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're entering that awesome time of summer, and of course, the business has cycles, and summer can seem a little more difficult to get a hold of people and things like that. But also, in general, building, we wanted to talk about some parts of the simple process. So that you can experience success as you move forward. I'm actually going to share my screen and run some slides if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see. Normally, there's a little share button, share screen, but interestingly enough, there is not.
Are you in speaker view at the top right-hand side?
Might be. What's
There's different view options. Oh, wait, Terry Lee says share at the bottom of the screen, and then there's a speaker view right-hand side. You can change your speaker views different ways. It might, but you have to roll over that bottom menu bar. It won't just show up. Roll down there and see if you can pop it up.
Okay. Oh, share. Okay.
There you go. Hey Rod, we understand that you're at this level, and just I always love to hear from a business perspective. So you've got 100,000 accounts, customer accounts, 100,000 now, right?
Yeah.
So someone in your organization can help you at all times, right?
You can actually share. Let's see. Let's try desktop 2. Share that, and then I'm gonna flick this open. How's that? Does everybody see the fruits of summer building?
Yes, it looks great.
Awesome. So excited. All right, let's talk a little bit about building strategies for the summer. And so one of the difficulties that people have or talk about as far as when I talk to people or mentor people about building, it's usually comes down to finding people to teach, and so with finding people, I wanted to address a specific strategy, talking primarily about tap rooting. And now tap rooting is not stacking people. So a lot of times people talk about tap rooting and they think of it as I'm just going to drive my organization deep and I'm going to enroll people and I'm going to put them all on top of each other. Now that's not actually what tap rooting is. Tap rooting is actually the process of moving through warm markets, and not just warm markets, but your closest relationships. And as companies get more mature, and as the economies improve in different areas, you'll probably notice that people become more resistant. And so resistance, the breakdown of resistance is when there are relationships of trust that are formed. And so what this means in a networking term is that messages move primarily freely through relationships of trust. And a lot of times there's a feeling or sense that when we start building a business like that, or like this, that we need to go to a cold market. And a lot of people talk about things like cold contacting or lead generation or different tactics like that that basically attract in a cold market. And these strategies can work, and there's lots of people that do them. However, I have found that if relationships of trust are not cultivated, that the teams are generally weak and don't have the fortitude to maintain long-term residuals. And so I know some teams, or have heard of teams of being 2 or 3 or 400,000 people and having minimal builders when the leader was primarily focused on just cold lead generation. And so cold lead generation is basically a direct marketing strategy. So typically if a person just has a product and there's not really a compensation model that's built in layers, then people resort to direct selling. And that's the process of you marketing your product directly to customers. And so that is primarily driven through cold leads and online lead generation and other tactics and strategies that get you in front of more and more people. None of those things are bad. It's just a lot more difficult, and it's not leveraging the power of the comp plan the way that it's designed. So the beauty of multi-level marketing is means that through roots or relationships, you can build strength and stability and connect those relationships in depth. So, for example, if I'm working with a close network, for example, that trusts me, and they introduce me to the next person that trusts them, then the likelihood of that close is exponentially higher. And so when you look at it like this, instead of thinking of 100 people or 200 people or 1,000 people, if you think in terms of one person or 2 people or 3 people or 4 people, the process of duplication is much easier. And this is what taprooting is. So, for example, if you were to take your cell phone out in a sheet of paper and basically look at any names that you haven't introduced the oils to, then there'd probably be a handful of names in that list. And these are probably connections that you either haven't had time to get to, or you have discounted for some reason or another, or most likely you just haven't gotten to them. I've been with doTERRA now for over 9 years, and if I were to look at my phone now, there are still contacts in there that I have not approached about the oils, and so the idea of connection actually is pretty infinite in itself. Now, the other thing is, if you actually have introduced all of your phone contacts, then you can look at your Facebook friends list and start to assess how connected you are to specific individuals in that. Now, between those two places, your phone and your Facebook account, there's probably 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 relationships that have not been tapped. And that's, I find that's the case with all of my builders. Now, if you actually haven't actually have combed through all of that, then you can also sit down and you can think about all aspects of your life, just starting back as far back as you can remember, and thinking about places that you lived and places that you've interacted and places that you've done business and places that you've gone to school and jobs that you've had and different things like that. And there's probably relationships that you've had in the past that come to mind. And so this again begins to further your network. And here's a part that people forget. Oftentimes when I'm mentoring, people say that I've gone through or run out of people to talk to, or I've burned through my list. But the fact of the matter is, your network is actually permanent. It doesn't leave you. When you have a relationship, these are permanent relationships. And the cool thing about people is people are always meeting new people. And so if a person actually knows how to actually move through life and create new relationships, then your network expands. And each member of your network, their networks are also expanding at the same time. And so as you allow your network to actually meet new people and create a referral base for you, your names list actually goes from being 100 potential prospects to 100 salespeople. And if you think about it that way, I can look back at my organization, and there's probably half of my organization that is a referral from someone that knew me. And in fact, my 6th line is the result of an individual that I flew home from Ohio with, a friend of mine that I associated with for a couple of years. He and I returned from our mission service on the same airplane, and when we landed, he went home, and I, of course, didn't have anything to do. I'd been on a missionary service for 2 years, so I had sold everything before I left. And so all of a sudden I was plopped back into society with no means. I had no money, no reserves, no car, no nothing. And my grandma let me use her back bedroom. And so I was there. And then out of the blue, as I was pondering what I was going to do, out of the blue, he calls me and invites me to get together, and then tells me that his mother was aware of my situation and wanted me to come and live with them. And so I actually took that opportunity. They had me a job by the next day, and had got me re-enrolled in college, helped me get a vehicle in place, and ultimately get into my own apartment within like 3 or 4 months. Now, this individual, of course, became a really important person in my life. And then one day I actually after I started doTERRA years later, I actually had a dream about him, that I was talking to him about the oils. And so I got up in the morning and I went and immediately sent him a message telling him about the dream. And then he sent me a message back, and he said, "I'm not surprised that you had a dream about me." And then he talked about how situations in his life had started to change, and all the things. He was getting a lot of spiritual direction at the time. And as it turned out, he lived in Texas and I lived in Utah. And as it turned out, he and I were going to be in the same area on the same weekend, which was 3 days. Which was only 3 days away. I was headed up north for a visit to some family members, and it happened to be in the same town that he was going to be in on the same day. And so by Saturday morning, we were both face to face talking about doTERRA, and he enrolled, but he was essentially already a millionaire, so he wasn't putting a lot of energy into it. But a few months later, he actually called me up and said, "Rod, I found a person that's a mover and a shaker, and I'm not actually engaged too much, and I wanted to link them up with you." And as a result, I talked to him, and I went down and enrolled them as my front line for my 6th leg. In fact, that's why I'm in Texas now, because of that taproot or that connection that happened. And now, as a result, there's a team here that's silver already, just from that connection. Now, there was also another contact that I had, a gentleman that was building another company, and I got him interested in the oils, but he stayed as a major leader in his own company. And then eventually he had found somebody that was like 3 years later, called me up and connected me with a person that's now a 7th leg for me, that's in another part of the U.S. And again, as a result of a referral from my connections, I have another team that's going. And so when you think about that, your network is a permanent aspect. One of the greatest stories of taprooting in action was when we first started. We actually, Jennifer had a dream. We have a lot of dreams about specific people. But Jennifer had a dream that we had talked to our sister-in-law, and she got up in the morning and she said, "I had a dream that we talked to Tanya about doTERRA." And I said, and then she said, "What do you suppose I should do?" And I said, "Well, I suppose you should call her and tell her whatever you said in the dream." And so she did. She called her up and said, "Tanya, Rod and I are building doTERRA, and we want you to be one of our leaders. Are you in?" And Tanya said, "Let me think about it." And she hung up the phone, and a couple hours later, she called back and said, I'm in. And so in the meantime, we contacted Jennifer's mother, all of our mothers. and so we, our Jennifer's mother enrolled, and we placed her on Tanya's front line as the family line, so to speak. Now, we asked Mom who she knew, and of course, she said, how about my other daughter-in-law? And so we went and talked to our daughter-in-law, Crystal, and she enrolled. And about, probably a month or two later, she calls me up and says, one of my best friends is interested in the oils. Can you come over and help teach? So I went over there and met that individual. And that person basically told me that doTERRA has nothing to offer me, but she thought the oils were cool. And so then I said, well, that's great. And then I knew that she was using oils, and my sister-in-law kept visiting with her, and they were buying retail. And then all of a sudden, they finally decided to get in a wholesale account. And so then I called them up, and I just said, hey, would you be interested? Would you be willing to host a class for me? Now, when I showed up to that class, they had the room full. And then I said, well, that seemed to go pretty well. Do you want to do it again? And so they did it again, and I came back, and the room was full again. And then they kind of decided it was a cool thing. And I found out later that they actually felt sorry for me, was the only reason they hosted classes for me. But that individual turned out to be Brianna and Bryant Hess, who are now Presidential Diamonds. And of course, their relationships have continued to go down. And in fact, there are 10,000 team members on that specific line that are a result of that taproot. And so if you think about it, my mother-in-law insisted that she couldn't build, but I kept asking her every time that I showed up. I go, well, who do you know that we can teach about the oils? And then she would look on her phone and say, well, maybe my friend Patty would be interested. And I said, well, why don't you call Patty and see if we can come over and teach her about the oils? And so she'd get on the phone and she'd say, Patty, my son-in-law's in town teaching people about oils. Can we come over and share them with you? And Patty said, sure. And so I loaded Mom up in the car, and off we went, and Patty enrolled. Now, I came back on my next trip through, and I said, Mom, you should build the business. And she said, no, I can't do that. And I go, well, who do you know that we can share the oils with? And she looked on her phone again, and she found another person. And she said, she called that person up and said, hey, my son-in-law's in town, and he's teaching people about oils. Can we come over and share them with you? And they agreed, and we jumped in the car, and we went over, and that person enrolled. And on this went, and now Ma, of course, is silver. and a six-figure earner in doTERRA. And so when you think about that, that's taprooting at its finest. And some of my strongest teams are built that way. In fact, my largest line started out, and he happened to have 7 sisters. And so the taproot started down, and ultimately that created one very powerful leg. And so as he continued to do that on other lines, eventually the other legs began to catch up as well. But for a long time, he had 1 and then 2 really giant legs, which of course creates a lot of stability inside an organization. So if you think about that, that's the power of taprooting. That's true taprooting. When you take a handful of relationships and you begin to determine relationships and connect to those with the connection, making the connection. That was kind of wordy. But in other words, if you talk to people you trust and they talk to people that trust them to make the invite, then then they can get the meeting. If they just give you a referral and you try to call that person, then it probably isn't going to work very well. That person may avoid you or be very difficult to get a hold of, or different things like that. And so if you're truly taprooting, you move from a relationship that really likes what you're doing to introductions within their sphere of influence. And if you do that, that can actually be endless. In fact, if you knew 4 people that would move with you, or at least refer you to somebody, then each of those 4 relationships have 4 relationships that would probably move with the oils. And now if you think about that, now we're up to 4 times 4, which is what, 16? And then if you go to the 3rd generation, now you have 16 times 4, which is getting you up, and you can start to see that when that compounds, if you're looking for the top 4 relationships within any given relationship, the compounding effect of that gets to be more people than you could possibly talk to. In fact, I've demonstrated this at several meetings where I'll put money on the table, and I'll actually invite people to make phone calls, and with a simple question, to contact people and ask them if they're open to natural forms of health, what they know about essential oils, and if they'd be open to learn more. And through that process, just by looking at their phone, I can have a group of people fill a calendar for an entire month within about 5 minutes. Now, if you think about that power, the power of the network is the ultimate power. One is relationships tend to stay together, so your organization doesn't tend to erode. And if you're truly working from network to network, then the actual lead generation becomes infinite. In fact, there's no end to it, really, to where you can get. If you think about it, Norma and I both know an individual that has the cell phone number of Donald Trump. So if you think about it, we're 1 generation contact away from the President of the United States. Now that's pretty significant. Now you could probably do that within any of your network. I know I have basically a distant relationship with a person that knows Richard Branson, who's personal friends with Barack Obama. So if you think about it this way, I can actually leverage my network in any number of directions. In fact, I've been developing a relationship with a friend. I've been creating a correspondence and evolving a relationship with a person who knows Elon Musk. That's basically the founder and creator of Tesla. And so if you think about that, this is how networking works. You form your relationships, and your relationships have connections to others. If I really thought about it, I'm probably connected to the CEOs of most major network marketing companies by 1 or 2 relationships. And so when you think about that, your network is permanent. That's why your basic job is to always expand your network. And to expand your network isn't just to add to your names list. It's to develop working relationships of trust with new people. In fact, it's probably exciting if you thought, rather than going out prospecting, that you were actually going out to create relationships, and the oils will probably come up. All right, here's the other tip. Don't discount anyone. When you think about your network, everyone is either interested or they know someone who is. Now that says it, but it was supposed to say is.
Hey, Rod, I appreciate your typo there, so you could laugh for a second. Can you just go ahead and hit on Jennifer and Kelly's line? Can you hit the mute? Because we're getting some feedback on both of their phones when they're listening in.
All right.
Thank you.
Got a mute there. Can't see the other ones. All right. All right. So here's another great phrase that I came across one time, and this is in line with what we were just talking about. That's you don't go out to prospect; you prospect while you're out. So you go out and you do your things and you meet people. And all right. So when you think about when you're out, it's good if you think about conversation openers. And so some openers could be, there's a number of things that you could say. For example, sometimes it can be as simple as, hey, I like your shirt. Where did you get it? I'm not a very good conversationalist with people that I don't know. And so for me, this is actually an exercise that I try to do. When I'm out and about, I try to purposely open conversations with people just to see if I can do it. Because it's not a natural aspect of my personality. I'm actually quite reserved. I'm the guy that can go on an airplane and not talk to anybody for hours, and I can be in an open room and not meet anyone. It's and so my introversion is forced me to really push my skill level to be purposeful. And so I've had to actually memorize things that are conversation openers. So I had to be a little more intentional about it than probably most of you. And so I actually have to read books on how to talk to people. I just don't relate with most people. I don't have the same interests. And in fact, I got to be assistant to the dean, by the way, in my college, and the way that I got that job is because I met a roommate. There was a guy that lived on our floor that was from Russia, and he and I got to be friends, and he actually introduced me to the dean, and that got me the job. But one of my assignments was to talk to was to organize the board of fellows, which were all the major donors and CEOs that ran the college, and so it was my job to set up the annual meeting and then interface with all these people so that they kept good relationships with the college. And I had one guy, he was the CEO of Daw Chemical. And he came up to me and he said, so how are he asked me a question about basketball. And I said, I just looked at him and I said, I don't know much about it. I'm not very interested in sports. So I don't. And he just looked at me with a blank stare and walked away. And I thought, wow, I just probably blew my 6-figure executive job out of college. So I realized that I've had a problem for a long time. But anyway, if you think about some of your conversation openers, and you're prepared with that in your mind, like what can you say to open conversations? Now, conversations, if there's a method called FORM, for example, which is like family, occupation, relationships, and money. So if you think about those topics, basically all of those things would result in some sort of conversation opener. And then when you think about what to say, the what to say primarily has to do if and when people ask you what you do. And if you're in an exchange, a back and forth conversation with somebody, and it actually begins to develop some depth. A lot of times I'll have an exchange with somebody, but it really doesn't result in a depth. And depth usually comes when you start to really get into somebody's life. For example, if you start asking them what they do and they want to know what you do, there's starting to be some depth of a relationship start to form. So the real part here is knowing what you're going to say when somebody asks you what you do, because that's ultimately the transition to doTERRA. For a long time, I used to say my own profession, and I couldn't figure out why. I'd always do that. I tell people my other job. And then one day I was like, hey, I'm trying to build this doTERRA business. Why don't I tell people that I do doTERRA? And so my big phrase now, when people ask me what I do, I basically say I'm an independent distributor with doTERRA. And now if they know what that is, then they'll say, oh, I know what that is. And if they don't know what that is, then they tell me, what's that? and of course, then I just simply say, well, what do you know about essential oils? And then that goes into a conversation or a conversation about oils. I have other people that are really skilled, and they'll say things like, there was some really good ones. They'll start with a question like, well, you know how people are paying too much for healthcare? And then they wait for the person to respond. And then she'll say, I have a solution for people that like natural alternatives to the healthcare system. And now if you think about that, you know how, and then you pose some sort of question that's relevant. And then then when you get a reaction, then you say, well, I provide a solution to, and then that can be your phrase. And I've had people be really successful with that being the way that they tell people what they do. And now the biggest point here, it's not so much what you say or what the script is. There's maybe not a specific script. The most important thing is that you know what you're going to say when somebody asks you what you do. Because if you do this correctly, then it'll create a continuous stream of interest. When I'm out and about talking to people, there's oftentimes where I'll visit with somebody and I'll get into a conversation and it gets some depth to it, and I'll find out they're interested. Now, to strengthen that relationship, I look at multiple points of contact. So I'm always looking, when I visit with somebody, I'm always looking for the next way that I'm going to visit with them, whether I invite them to receive an email, or if they'll let me text them, or if I have another interaction with them. Another interaction, a live interaction, is always best for relationships, but there are other ways that you can start to correspond with people. All right, now the other part is mastering your story. And now your story should only be a couple of sentences, and it's so that you can utilize that story as a tool. So for example, here's an example of one of my stories for Lifelong Vitality. I really like the Lifelong Vitality set. In fact, years ago, I had some pain forming in my knuckles. And when I started taking the Lifelong Vitality, it went away. And then I stopped taking them and it came back. And then I started taking them again and it went away again. And so ever since I've been taking the Lifelong Vitality, I haven't wanted to go off of it. See, that's a real quick and concise story. And in fact, your stories, you can run on one story if you need to. But for me, fortunately, over the years, in my use of oils, I have many, many stories. In fact, I was asked by corporate one time what my miracle with oils was, and I said, which one? Literally, have been hundreds of experiences with oils. Everything from, I had some plantar warts on the heel of one of my foot. I was dripping oregano on it, couldn't figure out, and it didn't seem to be doing anything. And then somebody told me I needed to scratch the skin off the top of the wart and then put the oregano on it. So I did that, and within 2 weeks, they turned black and fell off. And I haven't had them since. So see, that's an example of me using my story. With the breathe oil, for example, in the early days when I'd lay down at night, my septum would kind of close up and I'd have a difficult time breathing through my nose. So I started wiping breathe oil directly under my nostrils, and my airways would open it up, and I found out that I started sleeping more soundly. Okay, so that's an example of a powerful story. So if you think about your stories and get them quick and concise, so now you know how to open a conversation, how to respond when they ask you what you do, and then you have your story, which is basically a quick testimonial of how to drive interest in the product. Now, the next part is your demo. You know, how are you going to demo the product? One of the things that I like to do is with peppermint oil, I like them to put a drop of peppermint in their hand, use their index finger, and then push their finger against the roof of their mouth, and then rub their hands together and smell it, and then rub their hands on the back of their neck. Now, peppermint is an experiential oil, and so it's a quick demo. Now I know what to say, I know how to open the conversation. I know how to respond to what do I do. I know how I have my stories readily at hand, and I have a way to immediately demo the product with power and influence, effect. Then the next thing that I need to know is I need to know how to make direct invites to action. And this I find is the most perplexing thing to me, that how many people actually invite in a way that they're that you're creating too many escape hatches. In other words, it's an open-ended invitation. And probably most of us do this because we're afraid of breaking our relationship or somehow threatening our person. And so we'll say things like, we hold classes on Tuesday and you're always welcome to come. Now that would be an example of an open invitation that has very little effect. In fact, what you need to do is you need to get in the habit of making direct invitations. I had one time made a commitment to myself that I would never let anyone leave my presence without me asking them to take some sort of action. And now that served me well. In fact, I was in a meeting one time. I had a whole room full of people, and I had a gal that I could see was watching me, and she was waiting for me to be distracted. And so she was standing in the corner, and I was talking to a group. And as soon as that group engaged me at a table, she made a beeline for the door. Now, my no one leaves my presence without me inviting kicked in, and I turned around really fast, and I just said to her, "Wait!" And she stopped. And I said, "Is this something you want to do?" And she froze, and her whole countenance just dropped. Her arms dropped and everything. And she goes, "Yes." And it turned out it was something that she wanted to do really badly. She just couldn't figure out in her mind how she was going to pay for it and keep groceries on the table. And so I just sat down with her, and we figured out a solution that would work for her. And now I've never ceases to amaze me that when people get up to leave my class early, before I'm finished, before the close, I have this rule: nobody leaves my presence without being invited. And so as they're headed towards the door, oftentimes I'll just say, "Hey, just one quick thing before you go. Is this something you want to look into further? Is this something you want to do?" And oftentimes they'll turn around and say, "Yes, in fact, we just need to rush off because we have a meeting at whatever time." They had a stop gap on their time, but many times I'll find out that they're interested, and then I'll just say, "Would it be okay if I call you or contact you later tonight?" And oftentimes they're like, "Yeah, absolutely. We just need to go make this thing happen." And so if you think about it, never be afraid to invite. In fact, if they've come to a presentation, statistics say 85% of people came to your presentation with the anticipation of buying something from you. And so if you're not getting 80% of your people committing to something, then your presentation probably needs a little work. Okay. All right. This is the major factor, is getting your oils open. In fact, if you have oils out or open or around you, oftentimes they become a conversation starter in themselves. In fact, I believe that if you truly didn't have anyone to talk to, if you drove down to the mall with a bottle of orange oil and you opened the bottle and you stood by the door and you held that bottle out and just stood there and didn't say a word, I'm almost certain that somebody would eventually come up and ask you what you're doing. And so I remember Rob Young saying from stage one time, he said, "This company was built and continues to always be our core focus, that the main marketing method has been to open the oils and open the bottles of oils." And so if you think about it, just be ready with your oils, have your oils present, and have them open and out. And that has a tendency of igniting conversations. I remember I took Desiree on a Sunday to a church meeting with me, and we left after the first hour. And I said, there's a Bible study on the second hour. You have an interest in going to that? And she said, I do. And we started to go back in, and she said, "I feel like I need to take my oils with me." Now, Desiree carries an entire every oil kit with her everywhere. And so she pulled an every oil kit bag out of her, slung it over her shoulder. We walked through the door, and the first person we ran into ended up in a deep conversation about oils, and the oils were out, and she was putting frankincense on that person. And it ended up being a great lead and contact for her. Now I just find it fascinating that those that are ready with their oils are the ones that are always in conversations with people. So just remember, have your oils out and open. Now, the cool thing about our product is our product really is an experiential product. And it's true that you can connect with people online, but until you're getting oils on their body, there's probably not a true connection to the product. And once you have that true connection, then people begin to have experiences. And once they have experiences, it's probably difficult to get rid of them, actually. And in fact, I've seen instances on my team where people have been extraordinarily offended and still stay. so the oils are the magic of what we do. Now here's these. Now, if you think about being equipped and ready, these are things that you can carry with you, even if you don't have a lot of space. Like I don't carry in every oil kit around with me. I do have a small kit that I carry in my backpack, and it has all the major oils in it that I utilize daily. And when I'm traveling, all my go-to oils and things like that. And many of them are some of the some of the greatest experiential oils as well. Now, those are the ones that I generally travel around the country with. Now, if I'm going by car, I do carry in every oil kit with me, just because I have the space and things like that. And at my meetings here at the house, I do have an every oil kit that I keep open so people can see every oil. And that's, I realize that's probably not possible for everyone, but if it is possible, definitely having the oils out is the key. Now, if you keep one of these oils on your person at any given time, it is a way to create an experience and have a conversation. So Deep Blue, everybody knows Deep Blue. You can feel it. Peppermint beadlets. I was in a restaurant one time, and I asked the waiter if he wanted to experience a new breath mint. And he said, sure. And I gave him a peppermint beadlet. And he goes, dude, whoa, that's so cool. He ran in the back, ended up telling everybody, including the manager, and everyone met me. The entire staff met me at the cash register before I walked out the door because they were so enthralled with the experience of the peppermint beadlet. And so these are high experiential things that are easy to carry. The past tense oil, almost everywhere you go, you're going to run into somebody that has a headache. And it's really easy to say, are you open to try something natural for this? And past tense will create an experience. Now the Hope Oil, I put that up there because doTERRA has Hope Oil and Rose Lotion, where 100% of the proceeds goes to Healing Hands. doTERRA fronts the entire cost and operation of the product. And now, if you said something like this Hope Oil is freeing children from child sex trafficking all over the world, well, that's a pretty powerful conversation starter. And the Hope Oil, of course, is a great oil to showcase. And again, one that's easier and convenient to carry with you so that you're ready with your story and your product demo at any given time. So now here's the important part, especially as you come into the summer. Business is fundamentally built on consistency. In fact, it's very difficult to make success happen in any regard if you don't have consistent and professional habits. So here's just some of them. Seeking openness is an important thing. This openness is where you're asking appropriate questions to help determine if somebody wants your information. Too many times when I'm with our leaders in the field, I see people pitching people instead of inviting people. Now, seeking openness looks like this. Hey, I noticed I went to a restaurant one time, and the waitress, I asked her about a steak, and she said, I don't know, I don't eat meat. And so I said to myself, oh, well, she must be into natural things. So when I came out to check out, I just said, hey, I heard, I noticed that you said you don't eat meat. Are you open to natural things? And she said, oh yeah, absolutely. And then I said, what do you know about essential oils? She said, I love them. And I go, well, would you be open to me sharing some essential oil samples with you? And she said, absolutely. And wrote all our contact information. down. Now, that's a person that was very open, but if you notice my sequence of questioning, I was discovering openness in the path. Now, a lot of times I hear people say, hey, have you ever heard of doTERRA? And the person would say no, and then all of a sudden they go into a full-scale pitch about oils. And then usually you'll notice that people back off. That's not openness. And if you don't have permission from somebody to move forward, it's very difficult to actually get commitment on anything. And so seek openness, and that's a professional way to operate. The other thing is, don't contact to pitch, contact to set a schedule for a presentation. So a lot of times you'll get somebody on the phone and they'll ask you what it is, and you'll go right into the whole spiel. And the key is to limit your calls to a few minutes max when you're contacting somebody, and make sure that when you're contacting, that you're contacting to invite people to a presentation. So, and if you do this one thing, it will help you start to create multiple points of contact, which strengthens relationships and increases your likelihood of being able to extend the taproot. If you contact to pitch, then you'll find yourself at closed gates and walls almost constantly, and making very little headway. And so just remember, contact to invite to a presentation. The other magic weapon, and this is my key and what's carried me to 100,000 team members, being a total introvert and having a hard time talking to people, is my secret weapon is the follow-through. That's one area, and it probably has to do with my scarcity in contacting. I'm probably so scarce in contacting that I'm very thorough in my follow-through. And I know a lot of other people that just make connections but are very weak in the follow-through, and they're not setting up a sequence of events. And so follow-through can be the magic that actually starts to build a team. If you're not having multiple points of contact with your prospects, you probably are not having a team form. And if you find that you're very good with follow through and that you're touching base with people consistently on a pattern, you'll probably notice that you have team forming, people and community. The other part, this is just part of professionalism, but just look your part. Whatever your brand is, the brand you, make sure you're part of your part. You'll notice that you'll probably almost any time that I'm in any sort of doTERRA meeting or things online or anything, you'll find that most of the time I have a logoed shirt on. That's just, for me, I do that. One, it's kind of professional. Two, it's easy for me, especially in travel, because I only have to worry about a handful of shirts. So that's just one of the things that I do. But when I go to bigger meetings, oftentimes I wear a sport coat or other types of things. When I went to Italy, I had one team that was very professional, and I was astounded at the quality of the level of people that attended. In fact, almost everyone there at that meeting, there was about 100 or so, almost everybody was in suits and in nice professional women's clothing as well. And I was just stark. Everybody was sharp and done up. They had come from another company that was their culture, and they actually brought that culture to their team in doTERRA. But the caliber of people that were there was astounding. Just the professionalism and the seriousness that they took their business. In fact, it was the one meeting that I spent a great deal of time talking about the intricacies and stability of doTERRA as a business franchise, and that's an angle that I don't normally take. But the presence of the people present wanted that. They were serious business people, and ironically, the rank advancements that you see coming on Edge Essentials are largely from that team. Go figure. So think about your professionalism and how you're showing up and how you're presenting yourself and how serious are you about the business itself, and project that as best as you can. Here's another, just a simple thing, but being prompt to meetings is really important. I have a lot of times that people are sometimes even an hour late to some of our team meetings and things like that. And it creates an environment in which it appears that our business is not serious. And so if you set the stage and have well-planned meetings, you look the part, you're sharp in your follow-through, the preparation is good, and then you're prompt to those meetings. Again, being prompt is at time. For example, you don't want to show up if you're at somebody else's house, for example, and you're showing up to a meeting. You don't want to show up 15 or 20 minutes early to that unless it's pre-planned. Mainly because people may not be ready yet, and then you can actually slow down the process. And so being on time. If I show up too early, for example, I'll often sit outside around the corner or somewhere where I'm not noticed, so that when I walk up, I'm right on time. And then, of course, being late, of course, just eats away from the time that was scheduled. Here's another thing: if you're doing presentations, make sure to try to keep them under an hour. Most people think in their minds of an hour, and so that's just keep that in mind. I find that if you go over that, you lose them anyway. Here's I like this picture because this reminds us why we're doing what we're doing. This picture of Emily Wright, I know Emily Wright fairly well, and I would say that of all the pictures I've seen of her, this truly encapsulates her true soul. And we've all seen that throughout the company, and the people that are being aided from what we do is just profound. There's over 100,000 farmers like this little lady that's caressing Emily's cheeks around the world that are being paid by doTERRA so that they have sustainable living while they create our wonderful products. And to think of the suffering and pain that our product is alleviating from people, this is why I do what I do. I have a residual income. I have a very substantial and significant residual income. I do not have to go around the world. I do not have to leave my home. I do not have to do anything. But the reason I do, and the reason I load my schedule up, and the reason that I go around is because I realize what our product is doing for people around the world. And I look into all of your faces as well, and I know that my energy that I put in is impacting you. And I know that if I can transfer skills and hope and dreams to you, I know that I will change your life. And what else am I going to do? I could sit around, but I realize that when I go out and I expend myself throughout the world, that I'm creating change for others. And I'm ultimately lifting and liberating people around the world. And so it's remembering why we do this. And it's also remembering that the mission that doTERRA has never rests. We might get tired, we might rest, but the mission and the need does not. In fact, at this very minute, there are people suffering around the world. They're your neighbors. I'm always shocked. I remember giving a call to somebody who basically lives in the United States, and they basically said that they were eating the last pickle in the last jar of the last bit of food in their house until payday, which was another couple of days away. And I was realizing that the suffering is extending all around us. It's not just in faraway countries. It's right next door to you. It's your friend. It's people that you know. Right in your own neighborhoods, and believe me, the mission is not resting, and so as a result, I've expended a lot of energy helping the change of doTERRA and the blessing of doTERRA come to people throughout the world. So, all right, guys, that's my gig here. Let's see if I can get back to the unshare. Now I can't find my control screen, Norma.
I think if you roll over that bottom bar, you just kind of like move your mouse down, it should pop up for you.
Okay. Well, let's see. It must be.
And if you need to change it out of that, you can see it from different views up top on the top right. But you should, as you're rolling your mouse around, you should get a menu bar that pops up at the bottom that helps you to stop.
All right. Yeah. I got no menu bar. I've lost my controls. Oh, let's see. Stop share. All right.
There we go. Perfect.
All right. So the recording's done. Everyone will have a good recorded record of my inadequacy.
You're awesome, Rod. Thank you so much for sharing your heart. I love that you bring the mission forward. One of the things that I think would be good to get on the recording before you stop it is that you reminded me of growth. And you said that when things are stagnated or results are not happening to the builder or the business people's performance wants, right? You mentioned to me that the mission is not being shared. And we know as marketers and people that have built entrepreneurs that the story of that business needs to be passed along in a way that it can be shared. Can you speak just a little bit to that part that you told me? Because I think it's important for everyone to really catch this, that if we're having any issue that we're not happy with our results, we have to get centered back on that why. And I know you nailed it there with the pictures of Emily, but it's a principle that you teach us all the time, and you teach it so subtly that we miss it. So I just wanted to come back and have you echo that.
So
mission.
So of the overarching mission, or the?
Well, it's just that you remember, like we were talking about, when something's not happening, we're not sharing the mission. And so a lot of times it's, we're product focused, we're doing the business focus, we're going at it as mechanical, but it's not necessarily our why, but it's our bigger company why. But then it comes back down to, why is it we're doing this? It comes back to that emotional connection with people that, right. It just seems like that's the fuel. I love the Mother Teresa looking picture of Emily Wright. And, and I just felt like that's one of the counseling things that you've given me, is that, like, well, who's, you always say that, like, look at your business today. Who's hearing your story?
Right.
For me, it's stress relief with Balance Oil in 3 minutes time that kept me out of a lifetime of psychotic medicines and being drugged down to be half the person I am, right? Mm-hmm. 3 minutes, it's like, who's sharing that story for me today?
Right, right.
That? And then who's being able to save and suffering mission?
Right. Yeah, it is fascinating, Norma, because I have noticed, and throughout the years of Edge Team International, there's been 2 times where growth kind of slowed down, and leadership started to taper off. And both times it was because the message got too focused on opportunity rather than what, in other words, everybody became overly business focused rather than purpose focused. And as soon as we were able to get it back about getting the oils in every home, then things break through. And all of a sudden, the things that you're frustrated about no longer matter, and they go back. Because look, and the reality is, it's nice to make money, and money is necessary, and it's a great thing. And at the end of the day, what drives you forward is not the pursuit of money. It's actually your ability to make a difference in other people's lives and actually feel like you have worth and value. And so when you come into doTERRA, so many times I see people frustrated because they're not advancing ranks, or because they're concerned because their check is small, or maybe they don't even get a check, and they're frustrated. But that's not the focus that makes the business move. The focus that makes the business move is when you understand the impact that little bottle of oil has on people throughout the world when you share it with somebody else. When you have in your mind how that little bottle of oil is going to alleviate another person's suffering and pain. The minute you go into that space, all of a sudden, anything you do is glorious. If you get one check from doTERRA for $18, it is the most glorious $18 check you've ever received in your entire life. And I'll tell you what, it really is. In fact, if I were to explain to you what residual income is, you would understand how significant those $20 and $40 checks are. They're life changing. And in fact, and if you don't understand that, it's simply because you don't understand the power of residual flow. It's way, way more value. It's, I think, just in simple terms, it's about 160 times more valuable than its straight transaction counterpart. So, for example, having a $50 residual income would be the same as having a $8,000 one-off sale. And so never be sad about your small checks. In fact, the more you devote yourself, the more you lean into your business, the more you claim it. I find most of the time that people just don't know what you do. In fact, I went to my brother's house and I was sharing what I do. Of course, I had for years with my family, share what I do with oils. And everybody was like, yeah, whatever. And then finally, I was talking to my sister-in-law, and all of a sudden, she gets up. I come down for breakfast the next day, and she goes, Rod, it finally occurred to me what you do. And I go, really? It finally occurred to you. She goes, it finally occurred. She goes, you are changing the world. She goes, I couldn't sleep all night because it finally occurred to me what you are doing. And my dad walked in, and she turns around and goes, Bill, do you know what your son is doing? And he goes, well, I guess. He goes, Bill, he is changing the world. He goes, she just got all animated because it finally occurred to her the impact of what we're doing with co-impact sourcing, the purity of the oils, the natural forms of healthcare, the sharing oils and what they do, the mentoring of people worldwide, and helping you increase in your business and skill and worth and value and all the stuff that are naturally derived of just being a part of what we're doing. In fact, this is pure gold. The value you receive by being with us is dramatic. And just being here, just being part of a community that knows that you have value to give to other people, and that if you go out with all your fears and your blocks and everything and you work that forward and we help you overcome another little phase of that, we peel off another level of your onion and you get a little more successful, that is beautiful. You're not going to get that anywhere. You're not going to have that kind of community that's that concerned about your welfare. Only network marketing provides an environment that's conducive for that. It's actually funny to think about, but when you go into the actual world, the traditional world, everybody's working against you because they have to demonstrate that they have more value than you in order to have security. But in our business, in order for us to have security, we have to help you understand your value. And we have to magnify all your value. And we have to magnify and help you develop your value more and more so that you become more and more valuable. And as you do that, we all win. The farmers win, your uplines win, you win, your family wins, everybody wins when your value is brought out of you. And so, yeah, this is an amazing thing. In fact, it keeps driving me onward.
You nailed it. That's exactly what I wanted to have come out of you, because you and I know from the personal development, leadership development, workforce development, all that stuff costs so much money, and a PhD and any kind of business degree and add into all this stuff, there is no price I could put on the development that I've had over the last 5 to 6 years, even though we had a career on top of that, underneath it all, where we did all this, Rod. It's just incredible. Can I ask a couple questions just to kind of make sure we can go back to a detail that you shared?
Sure.
In your presentation, when you asked your mother-in-law and she said, "Can we come over and teach?" In that particular situation where you were leveraging that person's trust on their network, you said to us, if they pass along an invitation or a referral, it's not as powerful. did she actually go over to that person's house with you when you were teaching that person that said, yes, come on over? Did you go alone, or did she go with you?
She went with me.
That was a key piece that I wanted to make sure to anchor there, because if you're being taken into someone else's environment or someone else's connections, the thing that I see people messing up on is they're looking for introductions and referrals, and they're teaching their network to bring them introductions and referrals. And and a lot of times they're not giving us control over that. They're saying, oh, I shared your card with so-and-so and they're going to call you. And it's a waste of everyone's effort and time, quite frankly. And so that's why I want to make sure is that if we're going to be looking at our few contacts in our network, it's so critical to find those people who believe in us enough that they are willing to risk their relationship using their trust and taking us to that person to a three-way call or a face-to-face meeting. Because if that person's not there, you might as well just figure that you're back to a cold call again, sort of.
Right. Yep. If you think about it in circles, for example, if you think, okay, your sphere of influence is a circle of whatever size it is, and that's if you color that circle red, that's your red market, basically, your an area in which you have influence, and it has whatever number of people. But there's probably a couple of people at least that are very interested in what you're doing and understand the mission and things like that. See, like when I talk about my sister-in-law, Kate, she'll probably refer somebody to me eventually. Even my dad, after he became exposed 3 years later, he told somebody about the Lifelong Vitality because they were having some arthritis issues. And so that person, he got me in contact with that person, and we had a conversation and got samples out to him and things like that. So yeah, if you think about it, you take that relationship of trust, and then if you're always working in the spheres of trust, then you're truly taprooting. Okay. So if you have trust with a specific person and they have trust with their network, you're working with that person and their trust as you enter that network. Does that make sense? That was probably a little complex, but the reality is if you work that way and you're consistent, you can actually fill your day. There isn't any reason why you couldn't get to a point where you have meetings every day. Just by utilizing that, if you were truly going with somebody and they were leading you to a next relationship, that would compound. And then if you get your team doing that, you have 2 or 3 people that are building with you now, all of a sudden, one meeting each a week turns into every day of the week. So it's not very difficult to keep that going, but with that relationship of trust, that creates the cement that keeps your team together. A team of motivated people moving the same direction. If you're just adding people, through cold networks and stuff like that, then you probably end up replacing a lot of people over time. It'll just be a constant flow of, you got to stay ahead of the attrition kind of thing.
Right. And we offer 3 things. We offer a solution for health, obviously. We offer a solution for saving people time. And we offer a solution for being affordable, helping people to save money. I find that people get stuck when someone doesn't have time or they don't have money. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's interesting because we actually provide, like my family has saved time and money using doTERRA to keep us out of the healthcare process or to keep us from being ineffective or non-productive. But what do you say to those people that are like, well, it's summer, they just don't have time, they just don't have money. We're making those judgments in our head, and that's really dangerous. How do you help people that are watching this to be able to get over? We do have things that are going to save people time and money, no doubt. They're concentrated and they're affordable. What do you say to people that say, oh, I don't have time, can't find anybody with time or money?
Well, I find almost invariably it's not about the prospect. It's about the messenger. It's almost always about us. It's whatever your attitude and feeling about money is probably what you'll run into. I have a very abundant mindset. So when somebody tells me they don't have the money, it's just like, well, what are you doing in my presence kind of thing. It's, I mean, I'm not rude about it. It's not like that, but it's just like everyone in my presence has money. Like, that's ridiculous. Why do you not have money? This is a problem. Let's fix it. You know, it's now the other thing is I find that a lot of it is projected in your language. So for example, if I believe that people don't have money and nobody can afford anything because I'm in that same spot, then I'll talk to people that way. And you'll say things like, well, you know, the oils are kind of expensive, but you know, I find that if you at least buy the citrus oils, you can only get into $10 a month or something like that. You know, you start doing things, you start projecting that everyone is like whatever your situation is. And so I find a lot of times, like we had one of the leaders here at the house on Thursday, Tiffany Peterson, had talked about what she says. So you need to remember that the best value you could sell someone is the diamond kit. It is by far the best value. The things that you get from that kit are astronomical. The value is over the top. In fact, you save about $1,100 over the course of a year with a diamond kit. Now, the very worst value is the $35 enrollment, because there's nothing tangible received except for the access. And that access is voided, or that the access cost is voided if they get anything, if they get a kit, that they're not paying the $35. And so if you're selling $35 memberships, you're just, you're selling the worst possible value that you can sell somebody. And so when you think about that, what Tiffany would say is, hey, it's super cheap. You know, it's only $150 to get started with a small set of oils and a whole thing, or it could be whatever. You know, like if you were sitting with me, I'd say, well, if you want to do the business, you'll absolutely want the diamond kit. It's the best value. It'll set you up the best. You'll have the best access to free product. I mean, it shoots you right up to the, within 3 months, you'll be at 30% free product back on your purchases. I mean, if you're sharing, I mean, this is a personal business franchise for basically $3,000 and $150 a month, overhead, and you have a full-on business franchise. Let's see how my language is. You're like, oh gosh, that's only $3,000. Yeah, I mean, if you went and bought a McDonald's, you'd be laying $2 million out on the table. And you'd be lucky to make $100,000 a year. Or I think I think the total potential income potential to you through a McDonald's franchise, $250,000 a year. Well, I make several times that. So through my doTERRA franchise. So when you think about those kind of things, it's about your projection, how you feel about things. And if you're constantly finding people that don't have money and can't afford it, it's because you're projecting it. And so keep that in mind, and keep your language. The other thing I noticed that in marketing, we've kind of gone away from the era of professional sales. So years ago, it was about professional sales techniques, certain closes, certain this, certain that. But now we're in an era of authenticity and connection and trust. And if you truly have trust with another individual, it almost doesn't matter how you say it. All they want to know is, does the product work for you? You're giving a true testimonial, and then you just have to ask them to take action. And this is where direct inviting comes in. It's like, oh, you should do this. It's only $35 or free with a kit. If they're interested, if you're talking to them about oils, and you'll notice that all the language that I used in prospecting or in taprooting, all of that language was simple and natural. There wasn't any real tactic to it. It was basically, who do you know that I can teach about the oils? Well, maybe my friend John. Well, can you contact John and see if we can come over and teach him about the oils? Gets on the phone. John, this is Mary. My son-in-law's in town. He's teaching people about oils. Can we come over and share them with you? See, it very direct invite, but very natural, very authentic. And you know what? Every single person she called let us come and teach, and every single person that we taught enrolled because of the trust that she had. She's just genuine in the conveyance of the product is for real. It works for me. It's going to work for you.
I think the key thing there is that the directness allowed it to be yes or no. There wasn't a lot of sneaky or manipulative or coercing or strong arming or trying to get the right time, the right thing. That stuff takes too much of our head out of the game, and our heart can't actually show up. So when you're direct about it, better to get a no, it's not, I'm really not interested. Great, awesome, go to the next person. Because the fact is that we try to make it fit everyone, and we try to get too much into our head about the right thing to say or the right way to do it or the right day to talk to them or whatever. And like you said, I think it was 85% of the people show up ready to buy, and you don't even realize that. And if we're prescribing what they'll pay, like I did an employee event at the factory here. And, I made a judgment because some of the people that I had talked to were, they were on a fixed income and they were working 2 or 3 jobs. And I showed up at a McDonald's to this one lady, and she said, I have $150 in cash. What should I get? And I was like, I'm glad I didn't prescribe and predict on her, because that would have been a damaging thing to just go $35 in a bottle of citrus oil. But it really smacked me in the face when I left there. I was like, okay, she ended up buying the Healthy Habits kit, so she ended up, working it out to where we're going to, get the final thing all paid for. But it was weird that she was like, oh, I only had 150 here, but I want that kit. And I'm like, okay, cool. So we've got it all done and she's all enrolled. But I would have predicted that she would have been, it's just, we got to lose our own judgment. It eats us.
Right. That's why I've just gotten down to, I just ask people, I let them decide whether or not they are ready or have enough value. You got to remember, if somebody says they, most of the time, almost always, if they're saying they don't have the money, it's what they're really saying is, I don't understand the value enough to create any sort of sacrifice in my life. They have more important things to do with their money, which is everything else, if they don't understand the value. And so when you're getting that objection, it's just an indictment on your presentation.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I mean, if anybody has any questions, obviously, thank you for spending the time with us, Rod. But I want to make sure while we have people here, if they've got a question, that they can have access. You're very generous with your time. Thank you for going a little bit over here. But before we close it out, if it's okay, if anybody has any questions, I'd love for them to be able to ask it direct to you.
All right. You can actually raise your hand on the thing if you want me to unmute your line specifically. And I did stop the recording a long time ago, so.
It says it's still recording, Rod.
Really?
Now, maybe it's on my end. Maybe I'm recording still. I don't know.
Oh, that could be.
We'll see. I don't know that that's possible, but hey, I've got a recording thing going on in mine. So it's up top left. It says recording. So I'll have the full deal. So just wanted to make sure I'm not turning it on.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I thought.